So the issue is financial transparency. From the time that they started donating, it kept changing. So like you said, the first time they donated was basically just covering the cost of like a mobile phone, a couple of laptops, things like that, as well as a very small salary for me and you. Then they said...
So that was a red flag.
Right.
Obviously, there's more to the story here.
Yeah, and then they said, so from the money, how much do you pay for like salaries to people that work with AV? And we said, this much per year. And they said, oh, so from that, how much do you take personally? So on that call, there are other people. And to ask the question like that, so how much, Paul, how much do you take? Asal, how much do you take? And we were just shocked.
This ain't rocket science. If you're going to spend other people's money, you have an absolute moral obligation to explain to them why it is you're taking their money, what it is you're spending on, and how much you stand to profit yourself. It just blows my mind that people like Paul and Asal, the leaders of Anonymous for the Voiceless, people like Earthling Ed, people like James Aspie, lack this concept. I was just talking to my girlfriend about it. I had to reflect. Nobody ever taught me this concept, like this idea of transparency and accountability. My parents didn't teach it to me. My high school didn't teach it to me. We never studied it or talked about it at university. So I don't even know where I get this from. It's something so simple that I think it is supposed to be self-evident to people. But whoever it is you work with, I mean, whether it's on a charitable basis or a collaboration, you better explicate this. You better talk this through openly with your friends, with your colleagues. What does transparency and financial accountability mean to you and you and you? And what does it mean to me? And what does it mean to us? Now, I have absolutely never been in a situation where I had to pay myself a salary from donations. I think I currently receive $150 a month on Patreon. And also, thank you to my supporters. People buy me books via the Amazon wish list. And when they buy me, when people donate a book to me, the only thing they're expecting in return is that I'm going to read the book, which I got to make time for. That's a significant moral commitment on my part, that if I ask you to buy me a book, I'm going to read the book. That could be hundreds of hours. It's like be a lot of work. I've never been in this position. But look, you make simple, clear, comprehensible, accountable, verifiable decisions about money, about where it comes from and where it goes, and then nobody has any basis to complain. So if I were to collect donations in order to print a vegan children's storybook, something we understand, and maybe we're going to pursue not just publishing the book, but getting it made into an animated cartoon. Let's say it's an animated movie for children. Let's think big here, okay? Full length, feature film, animated film, whatever, okay? You can write into the plan from day one that you're going to pay everyone involved a salary that is commensurate with, that is equivalent to what they would earn if they were a full-time employee at Starbucks in their jurisdiction. So you say, okay, in this thing, like maybe this grows out of control. Like when we began, we thought there were only going to be 2 employees. There's me and one other person. But, then we end up hiring someone in Australia. And if anyone says, oh, well, why are you paying this guy $60,000 a year or something? It's like, well, we made the decision that if we're taking up all your time, this is a full-time job for you, is helping our charity or whatever, that we were going to pay you as much as a full-time employee at Starbucks. And we looked it up. And here's how much you earn serving coffee at Starbucks in Melbourne, Australia or whatever. We got the numbers off the internet. This is what it is. So this is how much this person gets paid. And if you see, this works in more than one way. Let's say that person is unhappy with their wage. They're asking for an increase. You say to them, well, look, if you were working at Starbucks all this time, after 2 years or 3 years, you get this much of a raise at Starbucks. So you know what? I can offer you a 15% raise because that's what you get after working at Starbucks for 3 years. But unless you calibrate what's happening with the money in all directions. It's so simple, but it's just mind-blowingly dishonest to me when James Aspie comes on camera, tells you to donate more and more when there's no accounting for what happened with the past 5 years of donations. Nobody knows where that money went, what was spent on him being in vacation in Bali, Indonesia, him going surfing, him going on cruises, all this shit he does. That's all you do see James Aspie doing? You see his lifestyle. You see his, you see him on permanent vacation. And he comes to the camera and he says, hey, you should donate more because, he makes a lot less money than you think he does. He says, oh, people say he's a millionaire. I wonder how people got this idea that he's a millionaire. So, well, he makes less money than you think he does. Why wouldn't you say the amount of money? Why wouldn't you just say, this is how much people donated, this is how much went to these project goals, this is how much went to salary? That's it. Just break it down and say what your standards are. If James Aspie believes he should make more than a surgeon, I think that's fucking insane. But maybe he has donors who say, you know what? I feel James Aspie is doing something that's just as important as performing surgery in a hospital. So if a surgeon earns $150,000 a year, then okay, I'm comfortable with James Aspie paying himself $150,000 a year. If you're just accountable and transparent, they can make that choice. Now, stick with my own hypothetical scenario. I start my own foundation. I'm paying people this. Let's say there is a medical doctor. Let's say it's someone who's actually a vegan heart surgeon, and he or she is willing to come on and join our vegan organization and start advocating for and talking about veganism, and they want to join what we're doing as a full-time job. I'm probably in a position where I have to say to them and I have to say to the donors, look, I can't pay you as much money as you would make as a surgeon. Also, the nature of the work is not as hard. You don't have to wash your hands as often. You don't have to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning in a hospital performing this surgery. Okay? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to look at how much a full-time nurse in a hospital would make. Then I'm going to pay you 50% of that. And I'm going to tell that to all the donors. I'm going to say, look, I can't pay this guy or this woman the same amount I'd pay an employee of Starbucks. Like, I'm going to pay this person more than I'm paying myself. Because the reality is this person is a surgeon and they represent a certain level of, scientific literacy, background, education. They're bringing specialized expertise and skills to organization. So I've got to pay them more. And I was looking around for a metric for how much more. And I decided I'm going to pay them 50% as much as a nurse would make full time, because what they do here is maybe relatively easy. This is what I'm proposing and they've accepted. So this is how we're moving ahead. And then the donors can talk back to you. Maybe some of the donors talk back. You say, no, they believe this person shouldn't get paid more than a Starbucks employee. Maybe some of them say, look, if you want to really keep this person on for 5 years, you have to pay them more than that. So, we're like, maybe their donors say, look, why don't you bump it up to being 100% of what a nurse would make in a like, even though they're a surgeon, maybe they should make as much as a nurse. Those are the kinds of discussions you can have if you just fundamentally subscribe to this bedrock notion of transparency and accountability. Because what you are doing in the charity and nonprofit sector is spending other people's money. And why? Why? It's not so you can go on vacation in Bali, Indonesia. It's for whatever purpose, advocating veganism, so on and so forth. So, look, the details of this fracas between Paul and Asal and Joey Carbstrong are not that interesting to me personally. This fundamental question of democratic accountability is interesting to me. And then there's this other interesting thing that shareholders democracy, brings into businesses. And, even in the case of this crummy 2-person board of directors, they repeatedly say they do have a board of directors, but only 2 people sit on it. Paul Bashir and his girlfriend, Asal. Great. Call that a board of directors. But they say they have a board of directors, only 2 people on it. As soon as you open up your organization to even just a little bit of democracy this way, like whether it's a company that has shareholders, that has investors, or you're a charity that has donors who start to play the role of an investor, what you get is that democratic element of debate, of new ideas coming in, and of people saying to you, hey, maybe you don't have a monopoly on good ideas. Now, it's quite possible this YouTube channel and the discussions we had about what AV is doing right and what they're doing wrong, mostly what they're doing wrong, it's quite possible that the critique on this YouTube channel influenced these discussions. Because one of the ideas that came up in this confrontation between the donors and the directors of this charity is that, hey, look, you know what? Having people wear a mask that shows a white male face with a mustache and beard doesn't make a lot of sense. I think my YouTube channel was the first YouTube channel to discuss this. I don't think anyone else, even on a podcast, discussed it. If I'm wrong, credit to whoever else pointed this out. I'm not making the accusation of racism. That's simplification, and I think people would call my argument as about an allegation of racism in order to discredit it or in order to simplify it to the point of absurdity. What if you have a group of black people in Jamaica carrying out this form of pro-vegan activism, this type of street protest? They're all black people wearing a mask that makes them look like a white man with a mustache and beard. What sense does that, what does it make? And the crowd in Jamaica, probably 90% to 100% of the people who are going to see this person are also black. It's Jamaica. It's not racism. It just doesn't make sense. It's just bizarre. It's just, like, people think, what is this about? Why are you black people dressed up as white people? Like, what? I mean, depending on what the protest is, I can, if you're a black person and you're dressed up as Donald Trump and you're wearing a Donald Trump mask, okay, everyone understands what you're representing, what the narrative function of this costume is. You're black people protesting against slaughterhouses and for veganism, and you're wearing this white man's mask. It really doesn't make sense. It's really incoherent. Japan, I spoke to, I had a very unpleasant conversation with some AV protesters based in Japan. I heard people from Japan with different perspectives on this, different aspects. Within Japanese culture, this is really fucked up. It's really distracting. It's really counterproductive. And among other things, in case you know, Japan has a massive culture of dressing up in costumes, in so-called cosplay. It trivializes the nature of the demonstration. In many ways, the way other Japanese people reacted is like, oh, you guys are like fans of a TV show? Like, again, it's not as simple as racism, but okay, you're a bunch of ethnically Japanese people wearing this mask of a white man with a beard with these TVs showing this clip, and then there's a crowd of people that's getting 90% or 100% ethnically Japanese. What? And, ironically, this movement, AV, Anonymous for the Voiceless, it began in Chiang Mai, Thailand, because it was linked to Durian Rider and Paul Bashir going to Chiang Mai, Thailand, and trying to directly imitate Durian Rider's very lucrative permanent vacation model of vegan slacktivism. And again, what is the meaning? What is the significance? At that time, Thailand was a military dictatorship. They've now returned to semi-democracy. They have elections again. They have a mix of democracy and military dictatorship today, to be brief, but they've taken some steps towards return to democracy in Thailand. But at that time, a bunch of white people in Chiang Mai, Thailand, wearing this mask. It was white people protesting in front of a crowd of Thai people wearing this mask, and they're not even thinking through the absurdity of, well, if you start recruiting and involving local people, so then it's Thai people wearing this. It's incoherent, it's bad, it's wrong. The fact that you have seats at the table, that some donors are allowed to have a voice or allowed to negotiate with you, means that new and different ideas start to come into the organization. In this case, the donors were so upset fundamentally with the lack of financial accountability, with the fact that they didn't know how much Paul and Nassau were making. Let's be clear. For me, the laugh out loud, hilarious point in this video, perfectly parallel to James Aspey saying, like, oh, I'm not a millionaire. I make less money than you think. Paul and Nassau sit there and deadpan serious say that they decided to pay themselves a very modest salary. Okay, what's your idea of modest? Do you think you should make as much as a surgeon? Do you think you should make as much as a full-time employee at Starbucks? And nobody else gets to be involved in that conversation. This is something you decided for yourself. We all have to assume that you are good-natured enough, you are detached enough, you are professional enough to not pay yourself twice as much as you deserve. And who's involved in that debate as to how much you deserve? Just by keeping this private, just by refusing to discuss and publish openly how much you are paid and how you justify that. Just through that one act alone, inevitably, your own donors are not going to trust you. Your own followers, your own collaborators, your own volunteers are not going to trust you. Because they're going to be standing there saying, hey, look, I'm working for free. I'm volunteering. I don't know how much you're making. And I don't know what percentage of the donations are going into your pocket. And all of those questions can be answered Like with one click of your mouse, it's sitting on your hard drive. It's probably sitting on your desktop, the Excel file of your names, Paul and Asal, and your 28 other employees. I have no clue how do they manage to employ 30 people in total in organizing silent vigils. Okay, how much is that worth? Silent vigils. You're organizing people standing in silence. You're not publishing a children's storybook. You're not translating it into 20 languages. You're not creating an animated film. You're not creating a documentary. You're not performing surgery. You're not even giving away free vegan pancakes or vegan hot dogs or manufacturing vegan chocolate bars. All kinds of things we're going to put a price on. What is the price you're going to put on silent vigils? And Paul and Asal being the assholes who sit in a microphone and make excuses for one shitty scandal after another because you keep saying politically offensive, insensitive things on Instagram. What's that worth? How much should your salary be? You say you pay yourself a modest salary, and James Aspey says he makes less money than you think. Don't leave it up to my imagination. Let's not get into a contest of what I think would be a modest salary for you, what I think you're worth, as opposed to what you yourself think you're worth. And in this case, your donors kept demanding to know, how did you set these up? How did you decide how much? And they got so upset with you, you so totally discredited yourself that they walked. They canceled their support. They called in Joey Carbstrong to be an auditor. They're frustrated with your answers, and they let. Do you think there's a lesson for all of us to learn here, Paul? Do you think there's a lesson for the future of the vegan movement? First things last things first. This basic concept of transparency, accountability, of just being reasonable with your donors, I don't know where it came from. My parents didn't live that way. My parents didn't teach me that. It was never discussed in school. What's the opposite of transparency? Concealment. What's the opposite of accountability? If you're not interested in transparency and accountability, what are you interested in? Huh, Paul?
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.
We basically received almost half of it. Mm-hmm. And as of recently, and that's when the donor approached us, and they were saying that they had some issues with us and they wanted to clarify some things. They apparently were receiving emails and messages from people. We don't know how people knew who this donor was, because this is the first time we're talking about this, I think. I think in the past we have said we do have a significant donor who does contribute in a big way to AV, but we've never really talked about it. So we don't know how people found this person's contact.
Well, we have our suspicions.
Right, but we do know that people were emailing and messaging them and saying that, for example, AV doesn't send chapters any money, or AV is...
Well, let's be specific about what we heard.
Right.
We only heard that, what you just said.
And also AV is...
racist.
Yes.
Because we have a white mask.
Right.
The Guy Fawkes mask.
That is one of,
let's be
claims.
specific about the claims that we heard.
So white, also it's a guy.
Yeah,
so
a white male.
therefore it's sexist, as well as racist.
And then also racist because of the BLM post we made where we called out the protesters for holding a decapitated pig at their protests, promoting anti-oppression with oppression.
Right.
We felt, as animal rights activists...
we felt like we have to say something.
We do need to.
Yeah.
In future we will.
Yeah.
What we went back on and apologized for was the nature of how we addressed it, because we felt we could have shown some warmth towards black rights.
Yes.
There was a request that felt like a demand, actually. It wasn't as seriously delivered as the swearing point and the post, but it was a very stern request. And the request was for us to have a board of directors replace the way that AV is structured currently, so that you and I would only have a seat at the table of many.
So we do have a board of directors right now. It's just 2 people on it. right?
Yeah. Yeah, right, exactly.
Instead of 20.
No one person makes the decisions.
No. So the issue is financial transparency.
Dun, 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 dun.